Out of all of the F1 teams currently scheduled to compete in the 2020 F1 season, only 2 of them are Italian, Alfa Romeo and Ferrari. Well, 1 really then. But it wasn't always that way. And one of the key players in the early days of Grand Prix racing was Maserati. And they used it with this car, the 250F. In order to understand the 250, you have to understand the era it competed in. This was just after World War II. And the Europeans had finally decided to stop going to war with each other and went to war with each other on the racetrack instead. So, old 1950s F1 was much different than modern F1. For instance, there was no manufacturer's championship. Instead of earning PR that way, manufacturers earned PR by the drivers that drove their cars. You see, it was a choice. Drivers could switch cars midway through the season if they didn't like them. So, if Sterling Moss drove a Mercedes, that was a huge boost for Mercedes, because they could say, Sterling Moss chose us. We didn't even have to pay him, he chose to drive for us. Same thing with Ferrari, or Maserati. And Maserati had some success before the war. Hell, they won Indianapolis twice in a row at the 8 FTC thingy. But after the war, Italy was in shambles, so it took them quite a long time to get back into it. But in 1954, a 2.5-liter engine, Formula, was established for Grand Prix racing, and Maserati finally decided to go for it with the 250F. And they actually had some pretty significant science for the 50s. They moved as much weight over as possible to the front axle and to increase cornering grip. Because these were not grippy cars, they had cross-ply tires for crying out loud. So any amount of weight over the front was incredibly helpful. However, they didn't think that same way for the rear, because you see the rear end was covered with a 200-liter fuel tank, which is 3 to 4 times the amount of a normal road car today, FYI. And as you went through the race without refueling, you would drain the fuel, and it would get more and more oversteery as the race went on. But they didn't care about that, so they had a 250-liter fuel tank in the back. And they had independent suspension in the front. And Maserati decided to go with a 4-cylinder. Yeah, 2.5-liter 4-cylinder, but it was supercharged, the only supercharged car on the field, in fact, which actually helped them a fair amount, and they actually sparked interest in the car because of that supercharging technology. And with that supercharger, it made a respectable 220 horsepower, which is not bad for 1954. And that interest, combined with that power and that independent front suspension, meant that some drivers, like, say, one Manuel Fangio, chose the Maserati 250F to win his Argentinian Grand Prix. Unfortunately, he didn't like the car enough and went to Mercedes, who gave him the title. Yeah. And by 1955, things had gotten even worse, as both Moss and Fangio had left for Mercedes. So despite having the new fuel injection system and disc brakes, developed at Le Mans just 1 year earlier by Jaguar, they didn't do very well. In fact, they did worse. 1 year later, in 1956, they did get a break because of Le Mans. You see, Mercedes had a bit of an accident, shall we say. Killed 88 people, injured over 100 more in the deadliest motor racing accident in history. And Mercedes withdrew from all motorsport completely. And Maserati went, yes! one less person to take our drivers away from us. Unfortunately, that was taken over by Ferrari. But, so in order to counter the Ferrari threat, they added a new 5-speed gearbox, improved the bodywork, and added 2 more cylinders to the engine, and actually angled the engine at 5 degrees of camber to lower the center of gravity. And that actually worked quite well. Moss returned it to Maserati and won 2 of the 6 Grand Prix, but Fangio took the title with his Ferrari. And then in 1957, just as the deck was being stacked in their favor, the bell sounded with a tremendous clang. The money was running out, and Maserati had to file for a government bailout. And those of you who don't know what a government bailout does to an auto company, they basically look at the automotive racing program and say, oh, you don't need that, and axe it. So Maserati knew that 1957 would be their last year of competition, and they went all out. They took the disc brakes and bodywork learned from the last few seasons and improved upon them. They made the bodywork out of aluminum to save weight. And most importantly of all, the engine didn't just get 2 cylinders, it got 6. From an inline 6 to a V12, making 315 horsepower in 1957. And immediately, people were interested in the new Maserati. In fact, it lured Fangio away from Ferrari, that's how important it was. So, we immediately had a 3-way battle with Moss in his Vanwall, some Ferraris, and Fangio in his Maserati. They were each battling round after round after round, and by the German Grand Prix, Fangio had an ultimatum. If he wins the German Grand Prix, he will become a 5-time world champion. If he loses, he'll have to work stupidly hard for the last few rounds of the championship to secure his title. He had a cunning plan. He started the race with half his fuel tank empty. His logic was that he would run around the track as fast as possible, the 22 laps of the Nürburgring. I'm talking about the full-on 16-kilometer Nordschleife. Yeah. He would run off in the distance, build up a massive lead, take 1 pit stop, refuel, retire, and then get on going again. So, that's what he did, and his plan worked to a treat, all the way up till the pit stop itself. The one time his mechanics had to be spot on, they were the exact opposites. In fact, it was so bad, one of the mechanics dropped the wheel nut under the car and took 30 seconds to find it. He entered the pits with a 30-second lead to second place. He left the pits with halfway to go in the race at a 48-second deficit to first, with only a few laps to go. How was he going to overcome it? Well, being Fangio, one of the greatest drivers of all time, he embarked on the greatest recovery drive the world had ever seen. The Nürburgring, the Green Hell, the most dangerous, destructive, and deadliest track in the world, he broke the lap record 9 times. 7 of those in a row. In the first lap, he closed the gap to Hawthorne in first by an unbelievable 15.5 seconds. He broke his pole position qualifying time by 8 seconds. And with just 1.5 laps to go, Fangio overtook Hawthorne's Ferrari and claimed a first place in 1957, securing him the driver's title for a record 5th time, a record that would stand until 2003. In fact, it also secured him a win ratio of 46.2%, a record still unbeaten to this day. And he was quoted after the race saying, "I have never driven faster than that in my life, and I probably never will again." And you know what? He was right. He never won another race and retired shortly after. As can be said, the same for Maserati. The bell had rang, the money was gone, and so were them from Formula 1. In fact, all of motorsport. They wouldn't be back racing until the early 2000s. And they've never been seen in Formula 1 since. Although, Alfa Romeo has just re-entered the championship after a 50-year hiatus. So, it is not completely out of the question that Maserati may be back.